This morning, I was just going up and down the all-time scoring list of the 10 greatest scorers in NBA history, and it kind of struck me how each one was the greatest or the most something, that they were all specialists. Or at least if they weren't a specialist like LeBron, they were the greatest at being very good at everything. Let's go back and look at the top 10 scoring list as it stands now. The number one all-time leading scorer is Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, formerly Lou Alcindor with the Bucks. He created the most unstoppable shot ever, the skyhook. In the history of the NBA, the unblockable, unstoppable, put his shoulder in, even as you look at images of it, the idea of blocking that. There is 19-time All-Star, most in NBA history, 6-time MVP, most in NBA history, but it was the shot where he scored roughly 90% of his points. The all-time leading scorer had the most unstoppable shot ever. Karl Malone is number two. He was part of the most unstoppable play ever, the pick and roll, where he scored 75 to 80% of his points off one play with John Stockton, one of the all-time assist leaders. He was a 14-time All-Star and, for the record, played great defense for most of his career. But they scored on a pick and roll, and it's the greatest pick and roll. Jerry Sloan coaching it, John Stockton leading it, and Karl Malone finishing it. It was that play that has him number two all time. Number three is Kobe Bryant. I've said he has the most moves ever. Jordan had some stock 4 or 5 moves that he went to in the mid-range. Kobe's the greatest artist that's ever played it. He never really had a stock move. He had the widest range of shots. He had much greater range than Michael Jordan. He would work on the baseline. He would work on angles. He would get you low. The 18-time All-Star, 5-time NBA champ, only 1-time MVP, but I believe he's the most creative scorer with fewer stock moves. Kind of the opposite of Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. He had more variety of scoring moves than any player, and he's third. Number 4, LeBron James. I think he's the most positionless player that does the most things well. I've called him the Swiss Army knife. He's an above-average passer, ball handler, way above average size. He is now a more efficient player than most. He can score low. He had now developed a nice three-point shot. There are a lot of players who do a couple of things well. Steph Curry is a great shooter and ball handler. LeBron, to me, is the best all-around basketball player ever. So in his own form, sort of a specialist, he'd be number 4. Number 5 on the scoring list is Michael Jordan. I believe he's the most relentless player ever. I don't think anybody played harder on both ends, was more competitive, was more physical for his size, was a greater trash talker. I don't think there's ever been a player that played as relentless as Michael Jordan. And many of you think he's the GOAT. He's the greatest player of all time. Number 6 would be Wilt Chamberlain. I think he's the most physically unstoppable player, certainly of his era and probably ever. He was going against 6'8.5" centers. Yeah, the Boston Celtics were a rival. Dave Cowens was 6'8". There's never been a player that physically didn't look like the rest of the league. Now, we know he scored 100 points, but he also averaged over 50 in 1962. Number 7, Dirk Nowitzki. Specialty, best European player ever, best Euro ever, and also he was the first great shooter over 7 feet. Listen, I grew up where the guys that shot the basketball at the NBA were 2 guards and small forwards. Point guards weren't big shooters, centers weren't, and power forwards just rebounded. He was the first great 7-foot shooter and the best Euro ever, a 14-time All-Star. Number 8, Shaq. I think he's the most dominant physical specimen in the last 30 years. He is Wilt modern day. Now, the matchups with Shaq don't look like the matchups with Wilt because there's a lot of 7-footers, and he faced big guys like Arvydas Sabonis. 4-time NBA champ, 15-time All-Star, led the NBA in scoring twice. But his specialty was, for his era, the most unstoppable physical specimen. Number 9, Moses Malone. He's the best rebounder I've ever seen. Simply put, Dennis Rodman was a rebounder but not a scorer. Nobody turned rebounds into points in NBA history more than Moses Malone, who played for a variety of teams. He led the NBA in rebounding 6 times, was in the top 3 multiple other times, a 13-time All-Star, Finals MVP, greatest rebounder ever who turned it into points. And number 10, Elvin Hayes, most underrated player in NBA history, and the master more than any player in league history of the bank shot. The great Elvin Hayes, who was a 12-time All-Star and a scoring champ, by the way, one of those years. Top 10 scorers, all in their own right, sort of specialist. Hi, everybody. Thanks for watching. Subscribe here to get the latest from the show. Also, be sure to check out more of the best clips from The Herd or go watch a few segments from other shows on FS1.